You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارشتايجر
pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Kevin, we view ourselves as an international show, as a show that doesn't completely focus just on North America. We are North Americans, so we do have that bent. But I am going to get hyper-local for a minute in an international focus and say happy Voyageurs Cup final day. This is a cup that I purchased on all of my own. It was all me.
All you.
I was the only person to put money into that.
Duane, the Voyager Rollins.
Yes. No, I'm kidding. The Voyageurs Cup final today, the Canadian Cup Championship. We don't have much up here, but what we have, we value. And the Championship of Canada for club professional football will be determined tonight between Toronto FC and the Vancouver Whitecaps, with Toronto FC holding a 1-0 lead heading into the second leg in Vancouver. A lot of questions around TFC. Oh. Going to be an interesting game, and we'll be watching with great interest tonight on the West Coast. But we'll give full coverage of that in Two Solitudes. We'll move on right now, though. Kevin, how are you doing over there?
You know, I'm doing all right. I had a feeling this morning. I felt nostalgic. I was reminiscing the days when I can wake up and open my TV and put Fox Soccer and just watch whatever happened in the world of soccer, or just put, to a lesser extent, Goal TV and watch in less clear vision what happened in the world of soccer maybe 5 months ago. So, you know, I really miss the times where I can just find my soccer programming easily on TV without paying $25 a month per channel. And yeah, I miss that timeline.
Yeah, I mean, I have Wimbledon on all morning, but it's been in a rain break.
Yeah.
So basically, I've been listening to them really stretch to try and fill airtime. And finally, there's one game. Federer's on right now, but he seems to be, not Federer, pardon me, Djokovic on right now. Seems to be rolling pretty well. That's enough tennis talk for this show, though. Kevin, we have a good show today. We're going to talk about Caribbean football. That's an interesting topic that's to me anyway, but the possibility of a Pan-Caribbean League. That's something that is a priority in CONCACAF, along with getting the Canadian League started, to get professional leagues in all parts of the region. That seems to be something that has some momentum. We have Nathan Carr, who covers Caribbean soccer all the time. You might know him from his Twitter feed there, Caribbean soccer, Caribbean football, I should say. He's going to join us in a couple minutes to talk a bit about that. But before we get to that, Kevin, I do want to get to our question of the day, and it relates to some news, maybe even some sad news out of Montreal yesterday. If you wanted to set that up while I get the results of the poll, yes, Kevin, we'll go from there.
In two different moves, I believe, the Montreal Impact have released, put on waivers, Maxime Tissot, left back, or sometimes left midfielder for the Montreal Impact, homegrown academy product that's been with the club for a long time. He actually played in Three Rivers with the Attack back then, has been with the club pre-MLS, and has been one of the casualties, they like to say, of the lack of USL presence 3-4 years ago, when that generation was coming of age to make that transition from academy product to professional product. They never had that playing minutes against the professional teams like the USL does have now. So I think he's a casualty of this. But on the second roster move, the Montreal Impact have signed to an homegrown contract David Choinière of the FC Montreal, part of the U20 Canadian program as well. So they needed a winger more than a left back. But when you look at the whole situation as well, Duane, 27 roster player out of 28, probably something else in the works for Montreal.
Yeah, and the window opens on July 4th. we think is probably going to bounce and land on his feet. He does have he plays on the left, and that's a valuable commodity in this league, especially in a salary cap league. If you can get him pretty cheap, it's essentially what's kept Ashton Morgan around in the league for this long, Kevin.
And we have seen Tissot have great moments of brilliance on an MLS pitch over the last few years. Just go back to just a few weeks ago with his great goal from 30 yards, that one goal of the week, or was runner-up. I think it actually won. So he does have a calling card that he can show to other clubs, and I wouldn't be surprised if he signed with an MLS club. My overall feeling yesterday when I heard the news is, well, for some reason, Kansas City and Swope Park would be a good fit for me. But that's just speculation that we're saying right now. But if I was a Marc Dos Santos, and I know that eventually I want to make that transition as head coach, I need a player that knows me. I need a player that would maybe do that transition with me. And if Maxime Tissot goes with Kansas City, plays more minutes, maybe with Swope Park for now, when the time comes, he could be a good asset for a Marc Dos Santos. So that could be a possibility, or even the NASL, because if you look now in the NASL, you have players that have been loaned there. Calumet has been loaned to the NASL by MLS, so by the Rebels. So, it could be a possibility, the NASL as well.
And even the idea of hooking up with a former coach, that's not unique to North America. Certainly, Carl Winnett, you just mentioned there, got his chance with Jesse Marsh. Yeah. The Soccer Today question of the day was, do MLS teams give homegrown players a fair chance? And it relates to this, to the Tissot news. The results of this poll, as I kind of suspected, are 70-30 right now on the no side. That's kind of where I lean to, and I think that it's not entirely on the fault of the MLS teams, though, because of the roster restrictions and because of the way that you have to build a roster in Major League Soccer. It becomes very difficult to sort of break young players in without, especially if they're not playing outside positions. That's generally what happens with your an MLS homegrown right now. You see it with the way the Canadian teams in particular are running their USL teams, that their top prospects are getting pushed wide. They're getting pushed out to those wide positions because they know they're going to spend their money on the imports and the big name American players to fill those that spine positions. And I don't know whether that helps the overall development of the game here, but even on an MLS level, Kevin, I just sometimes wonder whether that homegrown rule is as much marketing right now as it is football.
Well, that's a very good point. If we go quickly through the rostered players in MLS right now, just on the homegrown side, and it is easily to find, MLSsoccer.com/rosters/2016, and you have the designated player, the homegrown players. Quickly, Chicago Fire 4. If we go to Colorado Rapids, 1. Then the Crew, 3. You go to DC United, 4. Dallas, 5. Dallas is touted as one of the teams that does give a chance to its academy, to its players. They're not necessarily all signed under homegrown players, so the number 5 could be misleading for Dallas. But outside of that, Dynamo 1, homegrown players of Galaxy 5, Impact 5, New England 3. So it ranges from 0, like New York City FC. Yeah, they're still pretty young, but yeah, you're allowed to start your academy 1 year before, so they could have at least have 1. So, it goes from 0 to maximum 5 in the whole league, and that's not necessarily enough, and that number does not necessarily represent their playing minutes as well, because if you go to playing minutes, it's not a lot usually as well.
Yeah, I did the math a few years ago in terms of all-time minutes, and at that time, Dallas and Toronto were held like way above, but everyone else, but in terms of minutes played total. But when you looked at Toronto and the type of players they moved in, there were a lot of signings that came in that were sort of there for a little cup of coffee, that were a bit of a hold the shirt up to get some attention away from the losing on the pitch. There was a lot of criticism like that. Until there's an incentive to play homegrown players, and I do believe this. I'll throw something at you right now, Kevin, in terms of a discussion point. Right now in Major League Soccer, we have a quota in the sense that we have to play X amount of domestic players, or more to the point, it's that you can only have a certain amount of international players. You can trade those spots around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that they should switch that up a little bit and make it that you have to have X amount of homegrown players on your roster by a certain point. And you can grow into that. So maybe it's only 3 players in the beginning, and that shouldn't be too much of a stretch. But then eventually within 4 or 5 years, you get that up to maybe 7 or 8 players have to be homegrown. And that gives you a little bit more flexibility in the sense that that you could have like internationals in your homegrown and things like that, as long as they come in and they're part of your academy and all that sort of stuff. It will also give the league more international spots, which I think would be what the trade-off would be for the league to agree to that. I think that's the better way to go, because if you're not giving encouragement to play your younger players, all that's going to happen is you're going to have this middle class of domestic retreads that you keep pushing between team to team to team to fill those rosters that can kind of play a role but don't have a high ceiling. I think we need to put a focus on the guys with the high ceiling if we truly want North American football to get up to that next level. We're going to need to give those kids a better chance, a better opportunity.
And if you just take what happened yesterday in Montreal as an example, Duane, David Choignard, 19 years old, signed by the club for his first pro contract. We don't expect him to be the savior. We don't expect him to play a lot of minutes this year, but it's the experience. It's the fact that he's going to train majority of the time now with the first team, not with he was already training with the first team. He debuted with the Canadian Championship, but David Choignard has a higher ceiling than Maxime Tissot, because in that crucial development period between, well, in North America, which is a crucial development period, in the real world of football, it's your beginning of pro career period between 18 to 21. Here, because 3-4 years ago, again, I stress this point, there was no USL in Montreal, but that's for many different academies in this continent. You have Maxime Tissot and other players that were stuck in that we don't have playing minutes to
purgatory.
Well, exactly, the purgatory. Now you have David Choignard, 19 years old, higher ceiling. He's younger than the other player that I'm homegrown that Montreal signed, but his ceiling is higher. Skills-wise, tactically, technically, they're a little bit more prepared when they come out of what the system is now compared to what it was 3-4 years ago. So I think we see the example, the difference, where the trend is going, a little younger, homegrown, a little bit more academy, technically, tactically developed, that comes into the club, maybe more ready than a Tissot we met, or even Lefebvre. It took Lefebvre almost a full year to finally get a full like place in his team, almost on the starting lineup now all the time. Yes, Sima's at Euro, but you know what I mean? It's interesting when you're looking at that purgatory of 3-4 years ago, when that generation of players, which I would include, we met Tissot, Lefebvre, Gagnon Laparé, even though Gagnon Laparé is playing mostly with the USL team in the last few months, they still didn't get that when they were between 17 and 20, where they can really use the playing minutes against men.
There's an interesting double standard with fans and some media and the teams in some cases use when it comes to these homegrown kids too, is that on one hand, they say they're not good enough, and that's why they're not getting playing time, and that they're just not able to compete at the same level. But at the same time, they demand, in my mind anyway, they have expectations for these players that are beyond what they're capable of. So they can't win for losing, right? So you have a guy that comes in at 20, and these people expect him to just jump in immediately, be a contributor. They don't want to give them any time to grow. They don't want to give them any leeway. And I think that with the USL, that is the one thing that's most going to change. You're not going to have these kids thrown to the side almost immediately because they're not able to contribute right away, because you have the USL where you can put them in, where you can let them emerge. I think of Jordan Hamilton. He's a player that scored his first MLS goal this past weekend for TFC. This is a player, he's just 20 now, that has been front and center in people's minds for a while up here, but he hasn't really been able to break through, to the point that there were some people earlier this year that were calling him a bust already. And he was only 20, and he was just now starting to get some professional minutes and has scored his first professional goal at the age of 20. So maybe it's good that we didn't throw him to the side. And for those that think that he was a bust heading at 20 years old without yet having scored an MLS goal, I ask you what you had done by the age of 20, because I know that I hadn't done much more than, well,
I was really good at flipping burgers, right? I was so good. Nobody could beat me at 20 flipping burgers.
Yeah, I was good at quarters.
Arcade?
No, well, quarters is a drinking game that you play.
Okay.
You slap the quarter on the table
and
it bounces up and it goes into the cup and you drink it.
Yeah.
All right. We may continue this homegrown discussion. Well, obviously, this is a big topic of mine that will be on this show many times. We may consider a little later on this show. But right now, we're going to take a break. We're going to bring Nathan Carr on the line, and we're going to have a little different conversation from usual. We're going to talk about the possibility of a Pan-Caribbean professional football league.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And welcome back to Soccer Today. It's a great pleasure that we are joined by Nathan Carr of at Caribbean Football on Twitter. How you doing, Nathan, today?
Hi, guys. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure.
Nathan, we wanted to have you on to talk about the possibility of a Pan-Caribbean League and a little bit in general Caribbean talk at the end probably. But let's just start with a general question. This is an idea that I started hearing bantied about a couple years ago. You were telling me when I booked you that there might be some more news to share around this. What are you hearing on this project? Where is it right now?
Well, the news at the moment is that a meeting was held earlier this month, albeit quite a controversial meeting, where basically various member association presidents got together to start the ball rolling to discuss the idea of creating a Caribbean professional league. The meeting was held in Port, Spain, and the Trinidad and Tobago FA president, David John Williams, he was sort of the architect behind the meeting. He got everyone together, and they've been talking about the logistics behind it, the practicalities. So it's early days at the moment in terms of the idea itself. I think personally, I'm a big advocate for it. And I think it's the right time now, post Jack Warner, post Jeffrey Webb, to really get everyone together and carefully and sensibly plan it out. Because this league, believe it or not, had actually happened in the early 1990s. From 1992 to 1995, it was a very short-lived operation, but there was a pro league. In the end, it sort of crumbled because of various financial issues, and players weren't paid and teams pulled out, that sort of thing. So if we can learn from past lessons and take a sensible approach, and I think the idea of having another Caribbean Pro League this time around could be very, very successful.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels between what's happening in Canada as well. Victor Matagliani, of course, is the new president of CONCACAF, and one of his major projects up here was to try and get a Canadian Premier League, is what they'd be calling it, to up and running. That seems to be close to an announcement there. So you see those parallels. It obviously is something that appeals to him, the new president of CONCACAF, as well, to get professional leagues in all parts of this region. The name I'm hearing for this is Major League Football, which makes me wonder if there might be a Major League Soccer influence in this. Are you hearing anything like that MLS may be involved in some capacity, at least in an advisory role?
I haven't heard that myself. I mean, Major League Football was the name for the league in the early 90s. So that's not necessarily a new name. I mean, CONCACAF and Montegliani, the guy that you mentioned there, the new president, he's been involved in terms of providing funding for the meeting earlier this month. But I mean, we can't really talk about Caribbean football, can we, without mentioning off-field issues? And the reason why I mentioned before that it's controversial is that the CFU, the Caribbean Football Union, has essentially been completely bypassed in any discussions on this league, which I know you'll probably find quite weird in the sense that a meeting's being held to discuss a Caribbean Football Pro League, and the union itself has been ignored. What's happened is that David John Williams from the Trinidad and Tobago FA, he's kind of gone behind the CFU's back, and with the help of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, and CONCACAF and Montegliani, he, as a single member association, has gathered together all the member association presidents, and they're going on with this idea without the presence of Gordon Derrick, who's the CFU president, and the general secretary Neil Cochran. So we're in a situation really where the CFU has been cut off. A single MA is calling all the shots, and they've got unwavering backing from FIFA and UEFA as well, and CONCACAF. So while the league itself the idea is plausible, there's this huge sort of politicizing that's going on, which really isn't helping in terms of creating a difficult backdrop to work with. But in terms of answering your initial question, is MLS involved? I haven't heard that at the moment, no.
Nathan, when you speak about a Caribbean league, what does it practically involve in your mind, ideally? What do you see for this league? A team in every country, a team in every island? What's the most favorable situation for this league, in your opinion?
Yeah, there's various things that could happen. As I say, it needs to be well thought through. The idea that's come out at the moment is a franchise type system, which I think they have in the MLS, where you'd have maybe a league of 10 to 15 teams. There'll be no promotion or relegation. And maybe 2 or 3 rounds of play to ensure that each team gets enough fixtures, or you could alternatively have 2 divisions where there would be promotion and relegation. And what this would do would enable smaller countries in the Caribbean like Sint Maarten and Anguilla and Turks and Caicos Islands, those sort of countries, they could participate because there'd be 2 leagues. There's nothing set in stone yet. There are various approaches to this. I've been talking to various people on social media, and Santoki Nagalandran, who's a great blogger on all things Guyanese football. I was talking to him, and he came up with the idea of maybe creating like a Jamaica FC or a Haiti FC, which would essentially gather together all of your country's best players, and they'd represent the club of that country, if that makes sense. Yeah. The only problem with that, of course, is that my understanding is domestic leagues will continue to run simultaneously. So domestic clubs would invariably lose their star players, if that makes sense.
That was my next question. What does it mean for the Trinity Tobago League, for the Jamaican League? Do they just operate alongside, or do they actually join in, or do they find a way to have a way into that league? Thanks, Vince, for the question, by the way.
Well, my understanding is that the best clubs in the Caribbean, so your W Connection, Central FC, mainly clubs from sort of Jamaica, Montego Bay United, those would participate in the Pro League. But at the same time, the domestic leagues would still run simultaneously. They'd obviously be weakened, but what you would be doing is strengthening your Pro League setup. This could have, quite significant effects on the CONCACAF Champions League. If teams in the Pro League begin to play each other on a regular basis, that would inevitably drive competition, and we might start to see more Caribbean teams enjoying success at the CONCACAF Champions League. My understanding is that the domestic leagues won't necessarily be scrapped. It's just that the cream of the crop will really rise, and then those that are sort of deemed not good enough will continue playing for those domestic clubs.
So you might have a Montego Bay that moves up, and or W. Yeah, teams like that might move up, but not necessarily everyone. And the smaller nations may have to band together to create one team, is sort of what you're saying there. I'm wondering, Nathan, have you heard, or what would your feelings are on the type of quotas, the type of lineup composition that would be required for this to be a success in your mind? Do you think it would have to have a heavy local influence of players, or would you try and mix it up a little bit and bring in some imports?
I think a mixture, yeah. I mean, mainly the emphasis will be on homegrown talent. And really giving up-and-coming Caribbean players that opportunity to make a name for themselves at home. It's harder now to get into MLS. It's harder to get into Europe, in England. With the work permit situation, you have to play for a country that's ranked in the top 50 to join an English club. I think there's only 5 international spots open at MLS clubs. So it's harder now for up-and-coming Caribbean players that want to turn professional. It's hard for them to get off the islands. So I think the emphasis really would be on producing homegrown footballers and indeed coaches. If the opportunity is there to bring in, some overseas based players, maybe from North America or South America, due to geographical reasons, and sure, that would be a bonus. But you've got to work within your financial means, and I think that maybe it will be more sensible to focus on your own islands players instead of looking to Brazil or to Canada necessarily first to boost squads.
When you're looking at the Caribbean football as a whole right now, Nathan, how would you describe the state of Caribbean football right now in 2016?
Domestically or internationally, or a bit of both?
A bit of both. Domestically, where does it stand now with all the corruption that happened for the last long time, 2 decades, but with the change of that in the last year or two? And where does it on the field? What does it rank? What's the rising powers in the Caribbean?
I think domestically, first of all, there's quite a big disparity, I'd say, between sort of Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. They're traditionally the regional powerhouses, and those two boast professional setups, the Red Stripe Premier League and the TT Pro League. There's a sort of a big gap between them and the likes of the smaller islands like Antigua and Barbuda, British Virgin Islands, Dominica, those sort of countries. I mean, some people have told me on social media that the standard is really Sunday League level. In some places, the pitches aren't always great. Cricket is obviously huge in the West Indies, so there's a lot of cricket stadiums, and maybe the infrastructure isn't there all the time. So I think domestically, it can improve a lot. And I think with the introduction of a pro league, that would go a long way to boosting, technical development, coaching development, and we might start to then see the after effects, like in the CONCACAF Champions League, for example. On the international front, I think that the international teams are growing, but it's a slow process. If it's been inconsistent, really. If you look at the Gold Cup last summer, when Jamaica became the first Caribbean island to reach the final of that competition, eventually losing to Mexico. At that point, I wrote a piece on my website, and I thought, right, Caribbean teams now are really challenging the status quo in CONCACAF. That Jamaica have beaten the USA. All 4 Caribbean representatives reached the quarterfinals of that competition, and things were looking up. Recently, in Jamaica's case, they've faltered a little bit. So that's sort of, I've had to revise my initial opinion. I think Caribbean countries are generally doing the right things. I think there needs to be more emphasis on coaching, certainly, and infrastructure. We only need to look at Iceland, for example, very small population, but their emphasis on building more facilities and increasing their coaching education, that's reached huge rewards for them. So I think there's various things that can be done. But at the moment, we've got the Caribbean Cup qualifiers going on and World Cup qualification. So they're always good indications of where the Caribbean teams are at. It looks as if Trinidad and Tobago are going to be the sole Caribbean representative at the Hex, which starts in November. That's barring a miracle from Jamaica. And then the Caribbean Cup qualifiers, the final round of those kicks off in October. So yeah, it's always good to follow them, but I think progress has been made, but it's been a slow process, and there are various things which can be done.
Yeah, well, and that I think ties back into the league idea. And again, to speak to where I know best here in Canada, it's a lot of people point to that lack of a league as a major stumbling block to driving forward. Speaking of the league, what kind of salaries do you think would be required and are realistic for this thing to be a success? Would you be looking at these guys to make something around 40, 50,000 US a year? Or is that something that's possible that might be workable?
I mean, I'm not really privy to that sort of information. I suppose it's not stuff that's released a lot. I think, it's not going to be an overnight success. So early on, I would imagine that, it will be a sustainable living, a sustainable salary, but certainly nothing that you could compare to the likes of the English Premier League, where there's a hell of a lot of money and players are getting paid, as we know, silly amounts of money each week. But it's really relative to the success of the league and the sponsorship that the league draws, and the amount of tickets that they sell, because that ultimately will fund the players' wages. Generally at the moment, in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, players there getting paid, it's not a great deal as far as I'm aware. But in a lot of islands, they're playing strictly on an amateur basis. So really, we're starting on quite a low baseline, in terms of a salary. It depends in terms of the success that the league experiences. Sponsorship is obviously hugely important, and if travel is going to be a factor, which it probably will be, I think it's important that the airlines get on board and try and sponsor the league just to subsidise travel costs if they can, because it is expensive. That you can't hide away from that. It is expensive to move from maybe, I don't know, Grenada to Cuba, or from Bermuda to Antigua and Barbuda. There's not always regular direct flights from island to island. So travel is just really one factor that comes into play. But yeah. I think certainly that they need to get as much sponsorship as they can and really try and sell the product, because that's what let them down in the early 90s. There wasn't enough interest marketing needs to play a huge role. You need to be active on social media. You need to really, try and build up the product as much as possible to draw in fans, not just from the Caribbean, but you've got to remember there's a huge diaspora in the UK and America. Trying to get those guys in and entice them is critical to the growth of the league.
Here's a thought experiment. We've seen another country that's not necessarily been all that successful over the years in football, in India, recently come up with this idea of having this short sprint season that has become very successful for them, the Indian Premier League. I'm wondering whether a similar model in your mind might be the effective way to sort of launch this. So something that's maybe a couple month season that allows the domestic seasons to continue the same way they are now, but you have a super season somewhere in there that you can hyper focus on and market around. Do you think that's a model that might work?
Yeah, funny enough, Duane, that idea was actually talked about, I think last year or maybe in 2014. And it was sort of a carnival type atmosphere that they talked about, where for about 2 or 3 months during the summer, various teams congregate and they play against each other. They travel from island to island. And as you say, it sort of mirrors that Indian model where it's not a 9-month grueling season. It's a short 2 or 3 month season where clubs can make a bit of money and then return ultimately to domestic action. That could work. The only maybe criticism I've got of that is that it's looking at the long term. I think a lot of Caribbean officials they want an established sort of longer season to really come to the fore. I'm not necessarily sure that would be long enough, really. And I think the ultimate aim is, in the next few years, for the Pro League to overtake and overshadow the domestic leagues and really become sort of at the fulcrum of Caribbean football. And then we might start to see the after effects. But it's an idea that's been discussed. But whether that's actually going to happen, I'm not too sure. I'm guessing these are the sort of things, these are the sort of issues that are being touched upon at these meetings held by the various MAs.
All right, let's move it a little bit international in the recently finished Centenario tournament and get your take on the Caribbean performance overall there. In particular, I'm wondering if you could sort of speak at first to the Haitian experience and whether or not you feel that it was a positive experience for them to be involved in that tournament, considering the way that Brazilian match played out.
No, I think it was a positive experience. You've got to remember that it was their debut. They beat Trinidad and Tobago in the playoffs to get there. And yeah, I thought that actually against Peru, they didn't play too badly. I'm sure you guys will remember the Curvins Belfort miss right at the end. And they could have maybe snatched a point. Against Brazil, that was always going to be very, very difficult, world-class opposition, and they were comprehensively beaten. And then questionable sort of defensive tactics against Ecuador cost them. But overall, I think they need to try and take the positives out of it. Not all the fans, interestingly enough, are behind the new coach, Patrice Neveu. He was brought in December 2015. Some coaches think he's a little bit too conservative as a coach, and he's left out some of the key players in the World Cup qualifiers. I think he's had a bit of a dispute with the striker Duckens Nazon, who the fans absolutely love for his Gold Cup performances last year. So. There was that going on, but I think there's a lot of talent in Haiti, and you've got to remember as well, they are rebuilding from that 2010 earthquake, that tragic earthquake, which took down, just destroyed a lot of the country, destroyed the FA offices, and I think it was 30 people connected to the Haitian football in some capacity. They unfortunately passed away. So, they've had to psychologically endure that battle, and it's been very much about rebuilding for them. But on the pitch, yeah, a lot of work to be done. They need to look forward now to the World Cup qualifiers in September, although their chances of advancing to the Hex are very slim. And then Caribbean Cup qualifiers. They need to qualify really for the Gold Cup. That's the minimum expectation of them. And then Jamaica, yeah, and again, a disappointing campaign. I actually think Jamaica didn't play as badly as some people have made out. Their main issue really is just putting the ball in the back of the net. They cannot seem to do it. In 6 Copa matches, because they made their debut in 2015. They've played 6 Copa matches and not scored a goal. Clayton Donaldson could have probably had a hat-trick against Mexico. Charles Barnes could have scored a few goals. Maybe they missed Darren Mattox, who was injured, but They just weren't efficient or lethal enough in front of goal. And that's what Winfried Schaefer will be really annoyed about. And there's been some talk that he's going out to find a striker, a UB40, as Jamaican fans call them, maybe an English-born player like Dwight Gale has been mentioned, or Lewis Graben of Crystal Palace and Bournemouth, respectively. Maybe one of those guys could come in to bolster the attacking side of the team. But yeah, overall, disappointing campaigns for Jamaica and Haiti. And you know, their sort of attention now turns to World Cup qualification and the Caribbean Cup.
Fair enough, Nathan. We've run out of time. I have lots more I'd ask you in a normal time. Maybe we'll have you back one day. What's happening in the world of Caribbean football in the next few weeks that we should be watching out for?
So the under-20, the last group of the under-20 World Cup qualified preliminaries are going on at the moment. So yeah, the group with Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Anguilla, and Haiti is going on. And then you've got the Caribbean Cup qualifiers, as I say, coming up in October. And just a month before that, it's the World Cup qualifiers. So they're sort of the main sort of competitions to focus on. And I'll be providing as much information as I can on my website and on my Twitter feed at Caribbean Football.
Fair enough, Nathan. We'll talk to you soon, I hope. And we'll say goodbye for today.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, Open Lines After Dark, 5 Rings Daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we're back. Kevin, one of everyone's favorite team that they like to bring up when they're talking about Caribbean football is, of course, the infamous Joe Public Football Club.
Yes, Joe Public. Yes, I love them. I actually saw them live once.
Yeah, but we do know who Joe Public was owned by, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
And they've been now relegated. I just looked it up to see where they're at. Since Mr. Warner's legal difficulties, we'll call them, they have been relegated down to the second tier in Trinidad and Tobago's league. So there we go. That's what's happening with Joe Public for those that care. The Harborview is the team that I always remember. It's one of the first Caribbean teams that I ever saw, and I remember them. There was a not a CCL game, but back when the CCC, the CONCACAF Champions Cup, which was the tournament before the CCL. I remember Harborview in that, and their fans were just this wall of green and yellow, and it was quite an impressive sight. So I've always had a soft spot for Harborview after that particular case. But no, I'm fascinated by this project, and I do wonder, and I asked Nathan about this, whether or not that idea of that carnival, that quick sprint Indian sort of model might be the way to go. Because it's a little less risky, and it seemed to working really well for them. I don't know how it's going to work on the development side, but it seemed to work to get the idea of a club game and supporting a club game working in India. So I wonder whether it might work.
It's at least a fresh product you can put in the window and shop it. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the way India is going about with it. Look, where we have this here, people come here, flock towards this game here. You will like it, and then they can use this to get bigger. And it's easier to launch a platform and trying to get bigger than launch something too big and then you're stuck with it. So yeah, and we cannot mention the Indian Super League without mentioning Ian Hume, Indian Super League superstar. Well, formerly Indian Super League superstar.
Yeah, he's in Spain now, so yeah,
exactly.
He continued his career, helped him out.
See, it actually helped him, and it was maybe not a launching platform, but at least a rebounding one.
Yeah, well, exactly, precisely, and I think that's a little bit of what the Indian Premier League offers. Is it offers a little bit of a way for players to kind of revitalize their career and a way for some Indian players to get a little bit of exposure there. I would hope from an Indian, and maybe when that gets closer, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to try and get someone on to talk about that, because that's fascinating to me too. But I think that what you would hope there is that the long-term plan is to use the success and the interest that's gathered to try and expand the season longer and longer until eventually you have the same kind of interest to a normal season. But I think it's a really interesting way to launch, and it may even have some lessons here. A 2-month season in the summer in Canada to start a Canadian Premier League. It's not ideal, but you know what? It's better than a kick in the pants, as my mom used to say all the time.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that are better than the kick in the pants, Dwayne.
Exactly. All right. I wanted to have another conversation to move this to something a little bit further away from the Caribbean. I didn't think we were quite finished talking about England yesterday, Kevin.
Well, you never finished talking about England here. Jurgen Klinsmann might be the coach now.
Yeah, we got 5 minutes left in this block. So yes, exactly. The Klinsmann talk. My Twitter.
Go, Jurgen. Go. If I was a U.S. national team fan, Jurgen, go ahead. Let me actually sign your release right now. You go, buddy.
The rest of CONCACAF is like, I don't know. I think maybe you should keep him around in the U.S. for a while longer.
Yeah, that's true.
I woke up this morning. My Twitter feed was nothing but people arguing about quote unquote whether England was overrated. I have trouble with that one because I don't know if you can be overrated when you're England, because I don't think anyone rates them. They rate them as a decent side that makes tournaments, but to win them, who the hell says that?
Yeah, true. We didn't.
I don't read tabloid news very often. Unless
Daily Mirror and those things, yeah.
I mean, obviously, if there's a link and, they can clickbait me as well as anyone else, I'll occasionally click on those things. But generally speaking, I don't absorb it in the same way I absorb other media. I tend to run in the underground world of popular opinion, which doesn't necessarily, and it's informed opinion about this sport that doesn't necessarily see England that way. And I suspect that bubble is where I'm coming from there. And there are people out there that legitimately thought England could win this tournament. But I certainly wasn't one of them. I think in my pre-tournament rankings, I put them about 10th, which is turned out to be high.
Exactly. You put them a little higher than they actually are.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think anyone saw them losing to
Iceland.
Right.
Exactly. It's like Iceland. Nobody wanted to believe this story was for real. Well, there it is.
There it goes. And it probably ends now. I'm looking out my window right now and I can see it from here. There's a co-op apartment building right across the street from me that has an Icelandic flag in the bottom window of their basement apartment there. So I was kind of laughing when I walked past that the other day. I wondered if they're actually Icelandic or whether they're just, on the bandwagon.
Exactly. Look, there's 300,000 souls in Iceland, give or take. So the odds of one of them actually being across the street from you are pretty slim.
Yeah. Although someone pointed out to me that if you look at actually heritage and like gene stuff, that most of us probably have a little Viking in us. So there you go. Look, let's go back to be, I guess, serious if we're capable of that right now on this Klinsmann stuff a little bit. Is there anything to that? He does seem like a guy that would take the England job. I'll say that.
Yes, but it was an example that he made, though. I can't remember who said it per se, but the quote was, "We might be looking." I think it was somebody in the FA, probably Football Association, saying we might be looking at international proven coaches as the likes of Jurgen Klinsmann. Does it mean Klinsmann himself? No, it just means somebody that fits that mold, the description, somebody that's proven on the international level with an international team. So just to bring a foreigner coach for England is just something that's really out of sorts. So just to make the allegation that you might be ready to do so just shows you what state and what's the literally panic button pushing feeling right now.
Yeah, look, there's names that they're throwing around. Wonder what Mr. Ferguson is doing. There's a name. I'll start that one right now. Does he dive bored with his retirement yet? He could put the cape on there. I don't think he wants to tarnish his reputation, though.
That says a lot, though. That if you accept the England job, you might tarnish your reputation.
Klinsmann, yeah. I mean, someone else also pointed out that Klinsmann's lowest reputation are in the two countries that he managed their national team on, and that's kind of telling. So I'm not necessarily thinking that he'd be another Sven. If there's English listeners out there, he'd be Sven too. I'm pretty sure of that, and it wouldn't really work out. But this idea that they should be looking beyond the island to try and rescue this program isn't absurd. Obviously, they probably should be. They're going to need to spend some money, and they're going to need to open their minds to other cultures out there as it relates to this game. And I wonder whether the shock of losing to Iceland might be finally the kick in the pants that they needed to maybe really do that, because they tried it with Sven, but he was kind of a half measure. He wasn't really. In many ways, he was the foreign manager, and that was a big step for them and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not sure whether he was the right foreign manager or the level of foreign manager that they should have been seeking. They need to go out, and I think that they really need to
get a Conte or something. That's what
they bluntly need to look to an Italian or to a Spanish, someone from those parts of the world.
Del Bosque's looking for a job.
Yeah, there you go. Someone like that has been successful, because you know what? England does have enough talent that if you had the right manager, you had the right system in place, that you could mold them to have an upset run. They are capable of having a run deep in a tournament if they're managed correctly. I wouldn't say that would happen every time.
No, I understand what you mean. They're not necessarily good enough or set up enough to have like a run like Spain did, but to have like a run like Italy or France once in a while, yeah, they can do that.
Or one, or Greece, even, not to go back to that old one, but they certainly are as good as some of those teams that occasionally have upset runs. In fact, they might have a little bit more going on, especially when you look at what they've done with the young kids. And I think you would want to look at a manager that could work with a younger generation to try and start churning some of this stuff out of there. Like they need to cut. They need to cut bait with guys like Rooney. Like they simply do.
I think we have seen Rooney for the last time at that level for the England national team. Like we might see him in qualifiers and stuff, but at a group stage or knockout stage at Euro or World Cup, I think it was the last time.
Yeah, he said he wasn't going to retire, but I mean, sometimes you have to force retirement.
Maybe he won't have a choice.
Yeah, we mentioned that in the last show. All right, let's take a quick break. Come back. We'll leave England alone for a while, I guess. We'll stop picking on them, and then we'll do a little bit of a news bits and bites here to end the show.
Hey, it's Kevin of the Sports Podcasting Network. On SPN, on top of What's the Score, the Sports News Quiz, you can find a plethora of great sports podcasts. Hardwood Radio, Gridiron Radio, Sports, It's in the Game, Scuderia F1, the second most listened to F1 podcast in the whole world, Soccer Today, live radio shows like Open Lines After Dark, MLS Postgame Show, Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast, Off the Woodworks, and much, much more. All that on the Sports Podcasting Network.com.
All right, Kevin, this isn't in the lineup, but I'll throw this at you. I'm pretty sure you can handle this one. We're going to review the Voyageurs Cup, as I said, on Two Solitudes tomorrow. Today, I think we're going to do a 5-ring show a little later on. But in the meantime, let's get a quick prediction on tonight's game in the Voyageurs Cup for our Canadian listeners out there. Well, how do you see the second leg going in light of some of TFC's more recent disastrous news?
Well, exactly. Clint Irwin out for 6 weeks with a quad sprain. And I have to say, if it's just that, Toronto should consider themselves lucky. With the first look of how he got injured and the way he reacted, his reaction and the way he was holding himself, it looked like a teared quad. So just a sprain, consider yourself lucky. It's just 6 weeks. Could have been 6 to 8 months. So not as bad as I expected, at least. But no, you're right. A Quillian Robertson net probably tonight versus Vancouver, a team that's going to be tired in a way because they have been traveling a lot, and Q was goalkeeping for TFC2 last weekend. It was his turn. That's why Bono was with the club. So a lot of travel for this goalkeeper. We'll see how it unfolds tonight. It's interesting to me to see if Toronto can not just park the bus, but go after the game, because if they just park the bus, you never know what can happen. They don't have an away goal yet. They need to score a goal. So for them, they don't necessarily need to park the bus, but they need to go after a game. And we've seen lately in the world of football as a whole, teams that go after the game usually gets the result. So for Toronto, they cannot rest on that 1-goal lead.
Yeah, if Toronto scores tonight, they win. If they don't score tonight, they don't. That's my take on it, as simply put as I could. Because if they score, it means Vancouver has to score 3. And I think that Toronto is good enough defensively, even with the problem at the keeping position, that they can keep them off the board for 3. But if they don't, and it becomes a pressure point to keep them off the board for 2, I worry about that. In terms of the keeping situation, really quickly, I think that what is key for TFC right now is to not panic. Even if they lost 6 games in a row, and that's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but even if they did, they would not be out of a playoff race. They would still be in there because the East is so easy
Bad
right now. So you've just got to make sure that you don't panic. And I think that they should use the next 2 games. They have Seattle on Saturday. They have the Vancouver game today to see both of those keepers start once. And if one of them can step up and grab it by the whatevers,
grab the brass ring.
Yep. Then good. Then you go with it. If not, July 4th rolls around and you're going to have to make a deal, but they're going to be hung over a barrel if they have to make a deal right now for a keeper. I don't think they have the money to bring one in from outside. So that's my position on that. Yeah. Speaking of keepers, Kevin, Brad Guzan.
Yeah.
Rumored he's linked to Middlesbrough right now.
Well, he's not going to go to the Championship, so Middlesbrough is now moving up. So he might be staying in the Premier League, just changing a dress.
Yeah, that's probably a decent move for them. I wonder, though, whether playing on a team that's going to get lots of action and struggle in the Premier League is better than playing on a team, well, who knows what Villa's going to do in the Championship. But assumedly, if they follow the pattern of other big clubs that have gone down, sort of succeed and get some wins and get some confidence back, that's always the debate there. I don't think there's anything wrong with the Championship. It's a damn good league. And it's a league
that is coaching in the Championship now, so you never know what can happen with the Newcastle in the Championship. So, yeah.
Yeah, look, and it's a league we'll be paying a lot of attention to in the fall for sure, because it is a league that has a lot of great teams and old historic teams in it that can play a very physical, very entertaining brand of the game. I know that there's Spanish listeners and listeners that are more fans of that probably don't appreciate my appreciation of the Championship, but in terms of a spectacle, it's right up there in many ways with some of the leagues in the world. So that's a little bit of news there. I do think that most U.S. fans, though, would be happy if he remains in the Premier League, and I can understand that, Kevin.
Oh, of course. And when you're looking at a Brad Guzan, a goalkeeper that's been useful for Aston Villa over the last couple of years, he wasn't successful this year to keep the team up, but over the last few years, he was always getting the best of his team in the relegation battle. And that's what Middlesbrough is going to need this year, is to try and stay up that red line and get the result. And a veteran goalkeeper like Guzan could be a good help in that instance of trying to stay up.
All right. Before I go to my next transfer rumor, and this one seems like it might even actually be more than a rumor based on his Twitter activities. But before I get that, I have some bad news. I do have to let our listeners know, and that is that Lincoln Red Imps, they did lose the first leg of their Champions League first round qualifier yesterday. So Lincoln Red Imps are our new team. They're against it now.
How did Penny do? Because I know Penny did really well for me last night as dinner. But
okay, yeah. Hold on, I'd have to look that back up. Maybe I can find it here quick. I got the results here. Yeah, Floro beat Lincoln Red Imps 2-1. New Saints lost to Penny 2-1. Or sorry, New Saints beat Penny 2-1. So sorry. Valletta 1-0. That's the Malton team over they were Faroe Islands, yes, and the other game ended 0-0. So there you go. There are your Champions League results for the day.
Champions League results for you on June 29th.
Yeah. Don't tell us we don't cover the world in all of its entirety.
Exactly. You were speaking of news on the transfer, maybe for the Whitecaps.
Enrique Esquedo. He's a Mexican player. He's in the Mexican League right now. He's a striker. You looked his stats up, Kevin, and
yes,
he's 28. What were your take on those stats?
28. He's been starting playing professionally with Club America 2005. He was brought with this academy, made 107 appearances for Club America between 2005 and 2011, 15 goals. Then 2011, Pachuca. He's still owned by Pachuca, played 38 games, scored 10 goals for Pachuca. In 2014, he was loaned to Atlas, and then in 2015, loaned to UANL. And in 2016, he's loaned to Veracruz right now. 4 games played for Veracruz right now with 1 goal. So not necessarily stellar stats for him, but a type of player that could be a veteran presence, 28 years old, not too old as well in his prime, so a different type of player. I don't know if he would fit the DP description, so I don't expect him to be a DP. But if we look at his Twitter feed, Duane, his last 6 tweets have been either direct retweets of the Vancouver Whitecaps, speaking about the Voyageurs Cup game tonight, or links to articles saying he signed with the Whitecaps.
Yeah, I don't know if a Mexican player is going to suddenly develop a massive interest in the Voyageurs Cup unless he's signing.
Especially a fringe Mexican national team player, somebody that it's on the cusp, usually on the bench, and somebody that not necessarily is one of the best strikers in the league. So for him to fall in love with the Voyageurs Cup and the Whitecaps, yeah, there's something there.
Yeah, it seems like when there's smoke, there's fire and all that. Like, but that, which, look, for years I used to bash my head against the wall about the same mistakes that TFC kept making over and over again. This seems to me like a similar type of signing that the Whitecaps keep making over and over again and not having work out for them.
So look at Octavio Rivero, because if that is true, that probably mean that the Rivero to Colo Colo or just somewhere else is actually done as well.
Yeah, and I think that it is. Look, this is what they're looking for. It's a value signing. They're looking to try and find a Latin player. They like Latin players. They have a very Latin room in there, and I think that that's on by design, that they want to have a lot of guys from the similar parts of the world so that they can have harmonious dressing rooms, et cetera, because they can all speak the same language and that kind of stuff. They think that those players will come in cheaper, that they can get what might be a DP level quality player. If they came from Europe, they might be able to get him at a non-DP price in North America. And there's that theory has merit, but taken to its extreme, I think that there's limitations to it. And with the Whitecaps, the limitation is that they've yet to find a true groundbreaking, game-breaking kind of striker. And I don't know whether this fella, Esquedo, is going to be that kind of player if they come in. Now, that's unfair to compare players to players just because they're Latin. I get that. However, the stats sort of don't bear it out. And it just seems like another one of those like roll the dice and hope kind of signings, when what they need to do is get the pen out and sign the checkbook and make one of those kind of signings, in my opinion.
We have a good
going to break through.
Yeah, we have a good question from Vince Alvarado on Twitter. Duane, when is David Edgar joining Toronto? Well, the rumor last week was David Edgar was actually maybe joining Vancouver.
Yeah, can he play keeper, Vince?
If he plays keeper, he might go join Vancouver. I'm not Toronto. But the last I heard, he was rumored to join the Vancouver Whitecaps as of last year. There's
a lot of suggestion that he, Extra Time Radio, the in-house MLS podcast, suggested that he would be signing with Vancouver. Edgar is that as well. Not exactly sure. The suggestion they made is whether that might set up an ability to trade Kendall Watson. That was interesting to me. That idea that you could trade a top line, you bring in a decent defender of Edgar's quality, and then you could trade a guy that has a lot of value in the league in Watson for that striking presence. Yeah. That's an interesting theory and a little thought exercise for you there, because they have strong defensive backing. So there's a lot of teams out there that that might be willing to give up a guy that could score. I don't know if they're going to get a guy that's going to score 15 a year, but they might be able to get a guy that can score 7-8 a year for a Watson and maybe some allocation as well. So that might be an interesting trade possibility.
Here's a name for you that might be what the Whitecaps need. A player to have scored in Major League Soccer, not necessarily in always the best situation with teams, never really got a fair shot having players jumping him or like teams signing Didier Drogba over him, but Jack McInerney could be maybe what the Whitecaps need, a guy that's just a pure finisher.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I don't disagree with the idea of bringing in an MLS goal scorer that's consistently proven that he can score in that 7-8, maybe 10 range. That's like a secondary score. You still need your game breaker. And I think you're going to need to sign a checkbook for that. But I don't disagree with the idea of bringing in something proven, because I think that's been the Whitecaps' biggest mistake over and over and over again, is they keep rolling the dice like guys that aren't proven in MLS. And it's the same mistake that Montreal made prior to a couple years ago, and it's the same mistake Toronto made for years. So it must be a Canadian thing to not trust the American lifers out there, which might be true.
Yeah, but then they turn around, because look, over the last few years in Montreal, there were some MLS lifers. Same for Toronto. So in this league, you do need those MLS lifers, whatever everybody else thinks.
Yeah. All right. Quickly, Poku at Miami. That's an interesting signing. Miami seems
for a bigger salary, for $150,000 more per year. Poku, because salaries are divulged. He's looking in the NSL, $650 per year for Poku.
Sorry, did I laugh out loud there?
Yes, you did, but it's fine because we all felt the same way.
Okay, Poku is a gifted offensive player that has serious holes in his game in terms of his awareness on the pitch. So he might fit in down there. It's not a bad signing for him to go to the NASL to try and get some playing time consistently to work on those holes in the game if he's willing to work on them. Miami is a bit of a mess. They are one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the NASL right there this year. So it'll be a bit of an interesting situation. But he does need, I think, to get out of New York because he's clearly not going to get the time there. And with the amount of pressure that's being put on them to play him, then it's probably for the best for him to move on. Kevin, we should finish. We're wrapping up now because it is the hour mark. So the USL Open Cup, the USL,
well,
the
US Open Cup. USL is there's no team left of USL, but there were.
Yeah, the U.S. Open Cup, 2 results last night. The Chicago Fire, or the Firecrackers, as you prefer to call them.
Yes, they won. They won against I forgot the name. It was
the Columbus Crew.
There you go. See, it's Crew of Forgettable.
Yes, or the Crew FC, they prefer to be called now.
SC, yeah, exactly.
It was Crew SC, not FC, SC, because they're a soccer club. Soccer
club.
All right, and RSL and Seattle, they played 1-1 over regulation, and Seattle ended up winning in the penalty shootout. Some nice saves in the shootout there by their backup keeper. If you want to watch that out, the highlights are out there.
Exactly, 2 in a row, and Beckerman, his penalty was stopped, so it just doesn't get better for U.S. players.
All right, I think on that note, Kevin, I'm gonna say goodbye to you, and you can say goodbye to the people.
Stay tuned to the Sports Podcasting Network later today, 5 Rings podcast to talk about everything that's going on the road to Rio, and tomorrow 11 a.m. another edition of Soccer Today. And until then, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.